you. It's really a pleasure to be here. And it's, you know, it's hard to believe how long CSP has been at it and how many wonderful, wonderful speakers you have had. I mean, we're really up to almost 1,000. That is incredible by any standard. So I'm delighted to be here. Did that fall? No, we're good. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon and to talk a little bit about my new book, which is called, I guess you have to hold it on the bias, People of the Image, Jews and Art. And it is published by the Penn State University Press, going back to my origins. My very first book, Dreams of Subversion in Medieval Jewish Art and Literature, was published with them. And so I'm excited about the book and like to talk a little bit about it with my interlocutor. So I don't know the questions in advance, so I'm kind of excited to hear what she comes up with.
So without any further ado, let's start our conversation. Marc, could you tell us, how does a person write a book?
Oh, okay. How does a person write a book? I guess you write a book by in the same way that you have a conversation. So you have to think about who you're writing for. You have to think about what you want to say, whether it's worth saying it or not, because some things are worth putting in books and some things are not worth putting in books. And we've all read books in the latter category. And you have to figure out how to convey the information in an engaging way. And I always think about my great mentor at Yale University at a time when dinosaurs literally walked the earth, whose name was John Boswell. And John, I once asked him how he wrote such engaging books. And he said, well, that's easy. I write for Jerry's father. So he had a partner named Jerry. And Jerry had a father who had dropped out of high school to go and fight in World War II. And so he never finished any education beyond the first year of high school, but he was a remarkable autodidact. You know, he studied and he learned a lot by himself. And John would say, when I write a word, let's say perspicacious, I asked myself, would Jerry's father know what perspicacious means, right? And if he would, I don't define it. But if he wouldn't, I do define it. So I write my books that way. I try to think of a person to whom I address them. Full disclosure, we are married. And that person, although I make you read my stuff, is not you, because you are far too kind of Jewishly educated for where I'm pitching it.
Sure.
So that's the answer to how you write a book. You write a book like you have a conversation.
This was not your first book, right? And could you tell us a little bit how, this one is different from your previous books?
Like Manishtana,
right? I can ask you Manishtana in that book.
Okay. So, it's a good question. Okay. So you remember maybe when you were in fourth grade and you slogged your way through the horrible math homework you had
I did not do math homework.
Oh, you didn't do it at all?
Really bad.
You were really bad. Okay. Well, maybe you remember when you were in fourth grade and you slogged your way through your terrible math homework and you did it, right? And you'd hand it in and your teacher would say, very good, Mark. Thus, I quote, Ms. Esther Urist. You can imagine what we called her in fourth grade. It's a bad name, of the Harry Halpern Day School in Brooklyn, New York. And she would say, you did your homework, very good, but show your work. It's like, I did my work. Why do I have to show it? So the difference between this book and the other books I wrote is that over the years, I did a lot of showing, but not that much telling about how I process things. And I wanted people to be able, in looking at the book, to gain confidence in how you operate with this thing called art, right? You're confronted with an image that looks very medieval, of knights and bizarre, monsters, and yet in the middle of the page there's a Hebrew word. How do you parse that? How do you understand it? And many people say, well, I don't know anything about art, so I have to ask the question, well, can you read? Right? And usually people can read, right? Usually. And then you say, can you make sense of what you're reading, right? So you make sense of art in the way you make sense of any other text. But I want to show how that works. So this is a book about showing rather than telling. It's also a development, another thing that happened to me over the years. I guess when I first started writing about Jews and art, it looked so goyish, it looked so Christian that I thought this must be a fight. It's a polemic. Jews are fighting with Christians over images, right? And it was a big dust up, you know? And then eventually, reading a lot of books, I came to the conclusion, and I think the field has shifted somewhat, that really it's not that there's this adversarial relationship between Jews and Christians where Jews steal elements of Christian art and fling it back at Christians like a bonobo flinging its feces, right? It's
I like this
you like that image, right? So it's really more of a matter of it's really more of a matter of Jews and Christians sort of fishing in the same stream, right? They're drawing out the same images and they're using them for each of their own purposes. So both of those factors work into the manishtana kind of question. That's a good question. Thank you.
I like that explanation, and I wonder whether you, as you grew up, did you meet somebody who did the same to you? You know, what got you started to being interested in art history?
Well, you know, the book is dedicated, you can see, for my mother, who taught me how to read, and my father, who taught me how to look, how to see, right? And I think it really goes back actually to my parents, because my mother and her mother even would read to me until their throats were sore. Actually, I read a survey. Did you see this article in the Times? It says like 43% of parents are no longer reading to their children.
I heard about it, yes.
It's crazy.
I was not one of them.
You were not, yeah, you were always
but
reading.
it's a very big number.
It's a very big number, and sort of the ability to receive to receive a text and grapple with the text that came from my mother. And my father was the person who sort of said, well, a text can also be a visual text, you know, and he would take me to the museum. Let's say we go to the Metropolitan Museum, and we're standing in front of a painting. It's a, I didn't know it, it's a crucifixion, right? I'm like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I'm like, what? What's going on? Who's that guy in the diaper? And what have they done to him? You know, the Jewy looking guy in the diaper. And my father, because I think he came from I know he came from a traditional Jewish background. I think it was because of this, and he left it. He didn't want to engage with the religious elements of the painting. It was kind of distant from him. So he would say things like, look, Mark, do you see that fat man in the corner? He looks just like his horse. Right. So he would misdirect my attention to the little details that were not the main show, the main event. My mother, likewise, when she read, you know, we would always notice little things, cute little things that were going on in the story that weren't the main story. So I became interested because of those two people in really what would you call the practice of art history, which involves reading images like their texts and noticing things about them that you might not otherwise notice.
Sure. So I happen to know your mother and also your father. And
this is the advantage of being interviewed by your wife.
I testify that they are not into the Middle Ages. So
yeah.
what led you to that place?
That's you know, it's nice to spend time with you. I just want to say I feel it's Sunday. I haven't seen you all day. We rarely do that. So this is good. And you never asked me these questions before. I think this is strengthening the marriage, don't you?
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, CSP. Yet another reason to join CSP, I think. So the Middle Ages. So, you know, ever since I was a kid, I really was into the Middle Ages because I was into that whole thing, knights and dragons, and it was so imaginative. And this is, you know, I mean, my parents only allowed me to watch PBS, so I didn't really see movies. I didn't see, you know, but we went to museums, captured my imagination. It was both very, very different from what I was experiencing in the early 20th century in Brooklyn, or the mid 20th century in Brooklyn. And yet those people had eyes and noses and mouths, you know, just like us. And no doubt they had imaginations like us, and they had emotions like us, and all of that. And I thought, how different and yet how the same. And I was intrigued by the romance of it, although I didn't really give that much thought to what it might have been like if I had a time machine and could go back in time as a little Jewy Jew to the Middle Ages. I would probably be on the wrong side of the sword of those knights, right? But that also helped because when I think of an image like is on the cover of the book, you can see that there are knights here, but they don't have swords. They have the standards of the tribes. They have, so when Jews reconceptualized categories that were all around them in society, how did they Judaize them? How did a Jew live in that context? So I like the Middle Ages because everybody around me was so much a product of the current zeitgeist. My parents were on the picket lines when Albert Schenker, and the teachers union fought against the school system, the Board of Education, and my parents were involved in late hippieism. I mean, it was really, we were really in that world. Nixon couldn't be mentioned in the house. If he appeared on the television, my mother would avert her eyes. I see this now, in the current situation. It's maskil yavin. So it was an escape in a way. So that's what got me going on that.
Can I ask, how old were you when you realized that medieval people are like us but different from us?
Always. Because when you go to the cloisters and you see that not only there's this wild thing called a crucifixion, what the hell is going on there, but there's also a spoon, and there's also a table. There's also a dish with a funny scene on it, and there are wolves who are being chased by ducks as opposed to the other way around. You say, oh, these people are preoccupied with, interested in, affected by the kinds of things that we are affected by.
Well, one more reason to go to museums.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a great idea.
Do you think 43% of parents are not taking their children to museums anymore?
We have to make a So I understand that the role that your father and mother played in your intellectual development. Could you tell us about other influences? Who were your intellectual models?
Well, a lot of people. Some people I knew from books, and some people I knew from real life. The people I knew from real life include John Boswell, I mentioned before, who was, wait for it, the first person to write a book about gay people, by which he meant gay men, in the Middle Ages. That's how long I've lived, right? And he was just this absolutely great, sensitive, erudite historian who died of AIDS. But he was so much alive when he was alive, and so full of lively interest in everything. And he really encouraged me tremendously to think about art as text and to think a lot about the Middle Ages. When John taught at Yale, he taught a course called The Middle Ages, which if you taught it today, even at Yale, it would have 15 students. It had 400 students and 7 graduate teaching assistants. And when somebody sneezed in the 18th row, John would stop talking about Eleanor of Aquitaine and how fabulous she was and say, bless you. Right? So that was the character, the person. And he was a profound influence on me. But also Michael Camille, who wrote about the queerness of medieval art, by which he meant the marginalized sections of medieval art. What does it mean that you have a manuscript that's prayers to the Virgin Mary, and in the margin, there are monkeys sticking things up each other's asses? What is it? Is it mockery? Is it right? And so he parsed those things and tried to understand them in relation to the wider culture. Carlo Ginzburg, who was a, I don't know, historian, sociologist, who wrote about things like witchcraft that people didn't take seriously and thought about them in their social context. Natalie Zeman Davis, who made, for me, so many historical stories, biography come to life in history. Joseph Leo Kerner, who's still around and has written on Bosch and Bruegel, and Christopher Wood, who started out as an art historian. He now teaches German studies generally. And I gave a talk years ago at the Beinecke Library in Yale. And I don't know if you've been to the Beinecke Library, but it's all alabaster. and it glows, you know, and it was such a, you felt the honor to be in that place with all those wonderful books, and you know, and there I am, and he gets up and he introduces me. He was a Yale, and I was like, whoa, this is an honor. And then the first thing he said, normally when a scholar writes a book and I'm intrigued by it, I try to I try to think about it. I try to get a copy of it. But he says anything that Marc Epstein writes, I read immediately. So it was such that I was so touched by that. And then we went out to dinner afterwards, and we were at some they know I kept kosher, but they took me to some Spanish restaurant where there was literally a roast suckling pig. Wow. I swear to God, with an apple in his face. Like, you know the joke. You know the joke. I was walking past this Spanish restaurant the other night, and I looked in the window, and there's my rabbi, my Orthodox rabbi. So I go in there, and I say, Rabbi, what are you doing? He's eating a gigantic suckling pig. You know, roast suckling pigs. I said, what are you doing? He says, oh, you come to a place like this. It's so fancy. You order an apple and they serve it like this, right? So they literally, you know, and Wood got a little drunk and he leaned over the pig. Remember this? And he said to me, emotions. I said, what do you mean? He said, you got to look at emotions in the art that you look at, because maybe they mean something different than they do in art made for Christians. And that started me on a whole kind of jag that appears in the book, where I try to think about the emotional life of the protagonists of art. So he's been very influential, in his partner, Alexander Nagel. And really, the sometimes amazing, often frustrating and infuriating people in my own field, you know, who I praise and am bamboozled by at the same time very often. And what you realize is that even assessing somebody negatively, you can learn how to do scholarship. Absolutely. Right? But I guess, you know, I don't want to sound corny, but mikol tamidai iskalti, from all my students, I've learned the most. And if I think about the parts of this book and this study that have been most intriguing and interesting to me, they really have emerged out of encounters with students, because students often don't do the reading, right? So in a way, they come at things with fresh eyes. They're mercifully, although frustratingly, uninfluenced by the vast scholarship that can occur on any particular topic. So right now, I'm teaching a course on a single painting. It's Bosch's garden, so-called Garden of Earthly Delights in the Prado. And every week for 11 weeks, we stand in front of a life-size reproduction of the painting, and we make observations about it. And they, of course, are supposed to have done the reading. So one week the reading is about alchemy, and one week the reading is about psychology, and one week the reading is about theology, you know, and we approach the painting from all these different angles. But when they haven't done the reading, which is often, they kind of make attempts to bullshit about the painting, but sometimes it's brilliant, you know, because they have fresh eyes, they know all kinds of things, and they come at it from angles that I have not seen before. And I would say that in my scholarship on art and Jews and art, a lot of it is really the result of my encounters with my students. I should have put them before John Boswell, who is dead after all, and I can't, you know, interrogate anymore. And before these other scholars who I know, but I'm not in close contact with. I'm in close contact with my students every single day, and they are a tremendous influence on me.
Well, you should tell them. I'm sure they will be very, very happy to hear that. But could you also tell a little bit more about, I understand John Boswell was one of the great, really great scholars of the field. Could you tell us a little bit more about where you put yourself today vis-a-vis your colleagues?
Right.
How would you describe your place in the field, in the larger field?
I think of myself kind of as a translator. You know, I remember Judith Butler, famous feminist theorist, political theorist, gender theorist, came to Vassar once, and I just said, you know, Judith, our students love her, of course, but none of them has really read her, because if you really read her, you find it difficult. It's difficult going. And you're not quite sure she says anything, you know, dramatically new or different, but since this is being recorded for posterity and she may see this, I think it's best to be silent on that account. But I told her that I find her writing very difficult.
Mhm.
And she said, well, Mark, these are very difficult ideas. And in that moment, I kind of realized what my scholarly trajectory should be. I said, well, I think that pedagogy should be an active translation. In other words, you are a retired school teacher and you're a retired accountant and you're currently working in social work and you are a lawyer, right? I need to be able to talk to you about what I do and to try to be relevant to you and for you and in your life. And in that sense, I work very hard in my scholarship in this book to be that way. And not everybody, and not every scholar of this field or any other academic field has that as their primary aim. So I would say that if you ask me what my profession is, it is most specifically that of a translator. Oh my God, the time is flowing away from us. No, we're okay. We're sort of halfway through.
So can I just probe you more on that? Tell us, what are you interested in? So you told me that, and what are you not interested in?
Well, I feel like if I say what I'm not interested in, then the people who critique me will have yet another angle to critique me from, but I really don't care at this point because I'm old and I've been doing it and I'm going to continue to do what I do. So let me just say, I am really uninterested in history. Recently, a CSP, a stalwart, a very educated, erudite person who I respect a lot, is publishing a book, right? And it's a historical study, and asked me, would I be one of the readers for the press? And I looked over the book, which I think is a very good book, but I don't feel qualified as a historian. I can hardly remember that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and Spain expelled her every Jew. And in a way, I feel like I have all of that in the Library of Alexandria, which I keep in my pocket. And my job is to interpret history and to think about the people, right, behind the history. Now, you can't do that without knowing history, but I'm not the person who wants to sit in archives. So there are a lot of people who sit in archives and do that work. I'm happy to cop their work and to use it to my own nefarious purposes, right? But I want to do that work. And just like there's one person who makes sandals and another person who makes belts, even though they both work with leather, you don't ask a sandal maker to make a belt or a belt maker to make sandals under normal circumstances. And I think we each have our own roles. Now, when I say that, the big critique of me is, well, right? Speculative. You're very speculative, right? But the very people who criticize me for being speculative in my work, which I am, I confess, because are speculative themselves, as I'll explain, right? I am speculative because sometimes there's nothing to do but speculate. I'm interested in questions that don't have a little note attached to them that says, Moshe, the artist, made this in 1497 for his mother-in-law. And this is what the rabbit on the first page means. We don't have that, right?
Sure.
So I have to speculate, but I believe that what I do is I attempt to create a plausible constellation of possibilities and explain why those possibilities are plausible. So the people who attack me for being speculative, is this a bad thing, claim that they are scientific, right? So if you read one scholar, the scholar is looking at an image of a person in the early Middle Ages in Germany, the High Middle Ages in Germany, who's depicted in a synagogue wearing a tallis, a prayer shawl, over his head. So in this little book, there's like, I'm not exaggerating. The book has 140 pages of text. It's like 20 pages, 13 pages, 20 pages, something like that, devoted to the history of the prayer shawl from earliest antiquity to the Middle Ages. Okay, very scholarly, very scientific, right? And the conclusion of the scholar is that in 1300 in Worms in Germany, the cantor may or may not have worn his prayer shawl over his head, according to the evidence. Right. Okay. Or, another colleague of mine who I respect, and I love and respect that colleague, another colleague of mine who I love and respect, has determined on the basis of eye shapes that certain manuscripts were made in certain workshops. Okay, that's fine. But I don't see the eye shapes in exactly the way she sees the eye shapes. So to claim scientific veracity, for something that I find subjective,
I see
is
what
also
you-
speculative, right? So everybody's speculating, everybody
Right.
is creating historical veneers.
Sure.
The difference between me and other scholars is that I don't pretend to do that stuff, right? I take what they give me and I say, oh, very interesting. Perhaps we're looking at such and such a thing.
Right.
And I'm actually, to tell the honest truth, I am not interested in art.
Ooh.
I know. I'm interested in people, right?
Hmm.
I want to get to the bottom of the people who created the art. So that's my answer about how I am different.
Great. By the way, I don't think that you can be attacked more on the basis of what you just said, because it's a legitimate ground to say I'm interested in this and this, but not in that and that.
Right.
And they would, I think every scholar does that to some degree.
Yeah, but like for some reason, like I always say, like I'm at the pinnacle of the field of Jewish art, which is like living in the penthouse apartment of a one-story building. Like there's 6 other people who are interested in this.
Sure.
And of the 6, like 5 of them seem to think what they're doing is a science.
Mhm.
And I never thought of what I was doing as a science. I thought of it as poetry or midrash or art, midrash on art, so to speak, And I know you're a Talmudist and it involves manuscripts and it's all this stuff. And we're very different in the way we think about scholarship. But you've never accused me of being unthorough or speculative in a bad way. But I have been accused of that in
Sure.
various contexts. So
Sure. So tell us a little bit more about specific themes that come up in the book. I understand you said you are a translator, but that's a general mode of approach. But tell us the themes.
Okay, so let's see. Well, one of the important things that occurs in the book, and that you will notice reading the book, and that no doubt reviewers, should it ever be reviewed, and critics, should it ever be critiqued,
Mhm.
and I'd be happy if it wasn't, because I don't write books for the critics and the reviewers. I write them for you and me, right? They will surely notice, they'll say, well, Epstein is revisiting themes that he discussed before. But in Pirkei Avos, Ben Bagbag, or is it Ben Hehe? I think it's Ben Bagbag,
Bye-bye.
says Hafochba v'hafechba dekalaba. Twist it and turn it,
Mhm.
because everything's in it. And he's not talking about a Rubik's Cube, which was invented incidentally by a Hungarian Jew. It's very important to Hungarians that we note that Hungarian
Right.
Jews invented the Rubik's Cube, the biro, which is the ballpoint pen,
Okay.
vitamin C, and oxygen, all invented by Hungarian Jews, like the one seated next to me. I'm just waiting for her to invent something. So it's not a Rubik's Cube he's talking about, but scripture, right? That you should twist it and turn it and constantly revisit it and look back on it. And what I thought I would do in this book, by way of addressing the mandate to show my work, would be to go back to things that I'd looked at all the way since the beginning of my career. This is clearly a late career book. I have nothing to do after this book but to die, right?
Well,
So,
hopefully
okay,
that's true.
I turned 61 the other day, which
We will
means
see.
we will see.
Right?
I turned 61 the other day, which means I'm officially in midlife.
Right.
Since bis unter den
Yeah.
20, you should live to 120. So I'm now in the second half of my life. But anyway, it's a light life book because I wanted to demonstrate the perennial nature of scholarship and the value of returning to a thing until you get it, right? This is something that I've always thought about a lot, because the way my scholarship works, you might ask, what do you do if you're not sitting in archives, right? I look at stuff. So very early in my career, I came across an image that appears in the synagogue, in the ceiling of a synagogue that no longer exists. This is a synagogue of Chodorov, which was created in the 1600s and refurbished in the early 1700s. And it's magnificent. When the synagogue, we only know it was destroyed before World War I in pogroms. And we only know about it because there are black and white photographs from a very famous expedition, the Ansky expedition, that went out and looked at all these things in
Right.
Russia and Ukraine. And then we know from people who lived who were alive and saw what the colors were. So in the museum, what was used to be called the Museum of the Jewish Diaspora at Tel Aviv University, which now has some Anachnu or Lanu or something, it has a one-word name. There are models of synagogues, and one of the models of Chodorov synagogue. And in the center of the ceiling, there's a zodiac, which should not surprise anyone, even though in Mazali Israel, there's no fate determined by the stars. For Israel, the zodiac was a perennial ancient symbol of the glory of God in the universe for Jews, and used over and over again. And you find it in these Polish-Ukrainian synagogues of the 17th century. And in the center of the ceiling, there's a double-headed eagle with a crown, and it's holding in its claws two hares who are alive and running. And most of the people who wrote about this understood correctly that the double-headed eagle with the crown represented the Polish monarchy, or at this time the Austrian Austro-Hungarian monarchy, here in the person of the Empress Maria Theresa, and the hares represented, I don't know, the enemies of the empress or something like that. So I did a lot of research in my very early work where I proved that the hare was an unlikely symbol for Jews. And I don't need to revisit that, although we could revisit it one day. We've talked a little bit about it on CSP. And so what does it mean that the hares are the cause of this imperial eagle, right? So some people said that the eagle is elevating the hares, to which I replied, you don't elevate somebody by grabbing them by the neck, right? But it was a mystery. And what I did was I took this image on a postcard that I bought in Tel Aviv. I put it in my tallis bag, and I brought it to shul every Shabbos. And I would put it on the stender, where I sat, and I would just look at it. And the year rolled around. And one Shabbos, we came to the Parsha of Vayigash, Vayishlach, right? I think it's Vayishlach, where Jacob and Esau have their fated encounter. And the Haftorah talks about the eagle of the Imperium of Rome, who is nesting among the stars. And God says, even from there, I will pull you down. And I realized that it's an image of the eagle among the stars, and it's an image of the Jewish wish for the contravention of Austro-Hungarian imperial rule. And yet, around the eagle, there's a text that says, I bore you on the wings of eagles, right? And I realized was that text is a decoy. So that somebody comes into the shul and says, Jew, what is up there? Why do you have our empress's eagle? Person says, well, the eagle represents God bearing aloft the Jews, which it doesn't, right? It's really a specific reference to this. And so to me, my method is a sort of persistence and revisiting. It took me a whole year of sitting in shul with this image, going over it and over it and over it to sort of squeeze some meaning out of it. And I think it's a convincing meaning. So that's something that's very important. The idea of revisiting themes. So I revisit the theme of the pouting Sipporah. And this time, rather than simply observing that she's pouting in the Golden Haggadah, which I did in my book, The Medieval Haggadah, I ask, why might she be pouting in terms of what's going on psychologically in Midrash, in scripture, etc. And I use that as an entree into the world of emotions in Jewish, in art made for Jews. I revisit, I think most importantly, I could talk about it a little more later maybe, an image that I thought was one thing, a person reading a book, which turns out not to be that at all, right? And then it again might be that, right? So it's back and forth, back and forth. And then I revisit images of animal-headed people, and this time looking at them, notice that, oh, wait a second, these are animal-headed women. And the men in the illustrations don't have animal heads. What's going on there? So the idea of looking at things you've looked at before as a practice is very important in this book.
Great. Could you tell me and ask what is there a kind of a chain that links these? district units, they each seem very interesting by themselves, but do you see or not something that links them together,
So I actually,
that organizes them?
one of the things I should have said at the very beginning, when you write a book, one of the things you have to really think about is what people are going to say about it. And you can practice what a recent book called The Gentle Art of Not Giving an FUCK, right? Or you can,
Yes.
you can give many FUCKs. I generally tend toward the former and not care. But I did think that people might, shocking. If you know me, it's shocking, right? I did think that people might say, what are all these disparate studies doing here? And my answer is that they're not all disparate. They're all about looking at things that you might not have noticed, and how to look at things that you might not have noticed, and how to respond to things that seem to be on the periphery, like the fat guy and his horse, right? Of a scene in which everybody noticed everything else. So I think what unifies each of these themes is that there is somebody out there, or a whole bunch of somebodies out there, who could look at this stuff for 30 years and never notice what I notice and what I want you to notice, because those things are interesting to me, right? On the other hand, there is at least one instance in which I noticed something that I didn't notice for 30 years. So, that's what links them. That's what links them.
Sure, great. So it seems like you went back to the very method that your father and mother taught you originally in your childhood museum trips.
Yeah, and reading, yeah.
And reading.
For sure.
Yeah. Great. What could you go back a little bit to your intellectual influences and tell us something really revelatory that happened, that you encountered? It doesn't matter whether it happened last year or earlier on in your career. A real, intellectual experience that stayed with you because it was so revelatory.
I don't know. I think that I can't think of one because they happen so often. I think that every chapter in this book represents some sort of revelation. So let's leave it at that. There could be other things to say, but I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. What was your favorite chapter of the book?
Well,
I'm sure that you have.
Actually, this is linked to the question of revelatory experiences. So there's a chapter in the book that's called what is a book and what is a book for? So you might think you know what a book is, and you might think if you saw a book, you would know that it was a book. And also, you're probably quite sure that a book is for reading. And in that chapter, I paired two things that happened, actually revelations that occurred to me. One is that I was looking in the Barcelona Haggadah, which is a book that was made around in the 1340s and is currently in the British Library. And it shows a depiction of what looks like a person reading a book. And I talked about it for 30 years, and I wrote about it, the manuscript generally. And anytime I mentioned it, I would of course mention the fellow reading the book, because it's very intriguing to have a person reading a book in a book, right? And I was talking about it in a classroom, and somebody raises their hand and says, Professor Epstein, I don't think that's a book. I'm like, what? Well, look at the page. They're making bricks, and then they're pulling them up onto a building, and they're building with the bricks, and that person's holding two bricks. Right. I had a whole theory about why it was a book, and the reader, and the non-elite, and I had a magnificent edifice that I built, and this person tore it down, and I didn't know what to say. But then I figured out what to say, which is, this is a good example of how you learn while teaching. And so I ate out, so to speak, on that story for a long time, telling how I thought for years it was one thing, and this student, hail to our students, right? Yeah. Paying $92,000 a year, thank you so much for your revelations, right? Right? They're good. They're terrific. The student may reveal this, and I did this. I ate out on that story for a while. And it also had the added advantage of showing me to be a very humble person. And then I went to a conference.
Important tricks for a professor.
Important tricks to show that you're humble, right? Then I went to a conference, and there was a Vassar grad there, and she raised her hand and she said, "Actually, it looks like a bricks to me." And she explained why. And it turned out that it's sort of a deliberate ambiguity. It could be books, it could be bricks.
Right.
And I thought about this, you know, surely everybody in Spain at the time that this Haggadah was made, the shul going population of Spain knew that at the end of every service, the Mishnaic portion that is read says, "Al tikri banayich ela bonayich," right? Your children, right? Don't read the words your children, but your builders.
Right.
And the idea of being a builder through Torah. And I sort of redeemed the whole thing. So that chapter I loved writing because I was able to show how I, the scholar of books and manuscripts, could not identify a book, misidentified a book, right? And then the second part of that chapter, I talk about what a book is for, and talked about looking at another manuscript, this one from Ashkenaz, and thinking of it as just a conventional manuscript of the Pentateuch, of the 5 books of Moses, until I noticed that there was a peculiar place in the book that seemed erased, but it wasn't scraped. It was sort of eroded, as if there was a chemical reaction. It was a space the width of 3 fingers. And eventually I figured out that Jews were required to swear on a Hebrew Bible in Gentile courts on this particular passage. And that was the place that the poor Jew had to place his hand, right, to swear in court. And he's sweating, and that eroded the and we proved it scientifically, so to speak. And that was really thrilling. And it's kind of ironic that this incident of the Jewish Oath book was what moved me the most, since, as I say, I'm not a historian, but actually I understood what turns historians on. Because here I am holding the same book that this Jew, or many Jews, are holding, in Cologne, in the courts, and trembling. And I felt that in my hand, and I understood historians better and their need for determinacy, and their need to understand history and to grasp it in that way. So those are 2 revelations, and actually my favorite chapter of the book. I think we got to wrap up. Do you have one more question? Let's say.
Yes. So I can, you showed us very convincingly that sometimes because you're a professor and you interact with students, right? That enriches and in fact advances your scholarship. You're also not just a professor, but you are yourself an engaged Jew, engaged with your Judaism, right? You are practicing observant Jew.
I practice. I don't know. I'm not so good at it. It's like I could get to Carnegie Hall if I practice it up.
How do you see that to impact your scholarship?
Yeah, well, that's pretty simple. If I hadn't sat in shul for a year with the Cholder of image, I wouldn't have known anything more than anybody else knew about it. But because I lived the experience of the person sitting under that eagle 52 weeks a year, right? I got a lot of insights because I read the Piyutim in synagogue, because I'm involved with the Torah portion, because I live the life that many of the protagonists of these books and manuscripts live. I have certain kinds of insights. I'm not saying that they're infallible or that, and I'm not contradicting myself. Somebody who doesn't live this life might be from the outside have perspectives that would be valuable, but I have a lot of insider perspectives that sort of help me figure out stuff. So that's very important in terms of my methodology.
Sure. Great. So immersive experience matters.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. One last question.
Wait, that was supposed to be the last question.
No, one little last question. Okay, little last question. What's next? What's
next? You mean before death?
Before
death.
Coming from you.
Yes. Okay, so I'm working on an idea now that I'm developing of Jewish spaces in Christian art. So my next book will not be, after 4, 5, 6 books about Jews and art or Jews in art, right? The next book will be about art made for Christians in the Renaissance, both North, the Netherlands, so to say, Germany, and South, Italy, Spain. And when we see spaces in that art that are represented as kind of Jewish, right? The house of the Annunciate Virgin. So the Virgin Mary is being announced by the angel Gabriel that she's going to give birth to God, right? Well, since Jesus hasn't come into the picture, literally, right? That's not a Christian space yet.
Sure.
But it's not a Jewish space because it's done by Christians. So
Right.
how is that represented? Or when you want to show that, I think
very
so,
interesting.
the marriage of the Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph in front of the temple. What does the temple look like? Well, it's a species of cathedral, right? But okay, so it's a cathedral. So what's in the stained glass? What's in the statues? It can't be Jesus and the saints because they haven't shown up yet, right? So how Christians envision spaces that they really didn't necessarily view as Jewish spaces. And I've been traveling and looking at things, crazy things, things you wouldn't, images you wouldn't expect, Hebrew language and lettering where you wouldn't expect it. And I'm really, really excited about the book. And actually, it's politically apropos because the question of what spaces are Jews allowed to be in or claim, or what is Jewish indigeneity, is something that's very much part of the conversation today. So I want to thank you so much for your, and I hope to see you at coffee. I hope to see you at coffee tomorrow morning. You'll be there. Okay. And it's a pleasure to answer some of your questions, perhaps, if you have any. Sherelle?
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for this insight into the book. I'm going to jump straight into the questions that I received here. First is about the title, People of the Image, which is obviously a play on People of the Book. But since we have You Shall Not Make Yourself Peselu Masecha and all of that, what do you think about this relationship and how did you choose the title?
Well, most books on so-called Jewish art, which is not a term I use art made for and sometimes by Jews, because very often in history, what Jews had in their homes and their synagogues in terms of art was made by non-Jews, which is, to me, very interesting because it always involves a conversation with somebody who is not you. And most books on Jewish art begin with the question, how can we have art if the second commandment prohibits art? The second commandment is very specific in what it prohibits. It prohibits making a three-dimensional image that you yourself will bow down to or worship. So if you went to the Vatican for the past 100, 200 years, and you see people selling little trinkets, little Virgin Marys, little Jesus statues, little Michelangelo's Davids on the steps of St. Peter's, right? Those people traditionally were Roman and Libyan Jews who not only sold those things, but had the right given by the Vatican, by the Pope, and by the chief rabbi of Rome to manufacture those things in 3 dimensions for Christians to use. So the only thing that is prohibited is 3-dimensional art that you would worship. Now, there were Jewish societies that interpreted that more strictly and more leniently, but those are the parameters. So the idea of making art in books or making art on walls is, the fact that that is prohibited is belied by the fact that we have so much of it. Relatively little compared to Christian art, but that's only due to the exigencies of history.
Thank you. When reading the book, would you recommend to read it in order? Is there a reason to read it in order, or can people skip between themes and chapters as they see fit and are intrigued?
Very good. I would recommend consuming a large marijuana spliff or a CBD bag of CBD gummies and standing on one's head so the blood flows directly into the brain, and then choosing whatever the hell chapter you wish. No, that's a very good question. It's not, ein achor ve'ein kadum. There's, as Rashi says of the Torah, there's no, right? There's no prescribed order. Just dip into it and see what you'd like. It is an excellent gift for weddings, brisses, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, dog mitzvahs, bow mitzvahs, and funerals. Give it to your friends, your neighbors, your enemies, specifically because you can open it at any place and you will find something interesting and intriguing and accessible. It's not written in this language that's impossible to access.
Thank you. Another question is, do you have an example of a humorous medieval Jewish artwork in the book?
Yeah, there's tons. There's tons.
Give us one.
Yeah, so I'm thinking now of a prayer book that was illuminated for Yoel ben Shimon by Yoel ben Shimon, and it has the Hoshanot. So the Hoshanot are prayers that are said on Sukkot, and they ask God to save the world, the environment, the planet, and one of the Hoshanot says Adam ubehema, right? Humans and beasts, please God, save them. So in the margin, there's a picture of a monster that's half human and has the tushy of an animal, right, with a tail. So it's Adam v'behema. It's a pun on the idea of Adam v'behema. Or for instance, in the Haggadah, the Kaufman Haggadah, which is in Budapest. Okay, I'm sorry. It's really one of the great collections. I'm serious.
Yes.
Of Hebrew manuscripts is found in Budapest, along with oxygen, biros, and Rubik's cube. And in that manuscript, it says "B'tzeis Yisrael miMitzrayim," when Israel left Egypt, and there's a picture of a cute little white dog who's very prominent on the page. All the Israelites are in the back, and the dog is in the front, and the dog has its mouth open like this, but no tongue. Why? Against Bnei Israel, not a dog would whet its tongue. The dogs did not bark, right? So it's a way of sort of punning on that. So there's a lot. Jews loved life always, even though it was a shitty life sometimes in the Middle Ages, but not every day, right? And very often they engaged in humorous repartee in their art.
Thank you. With the risk of you saying this is something I'm not interested in, so
Right.
you might say that, there's a return within contemporary art to Jewish themes for Jewish artists and Israeli artists, also going back in history, but also playing on them in new ways. Have you seen anything that interests you that is in conversation with medieval art by Jews or made for Jews?
Cool. So this is your question, I would imagine. Yes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what I have to say. When it's not kitschy and bullshit, I like it, whatever it is. And my standard for not kitschy and bullshit is if it presents a real engagement. And because I need to, I'm such a brilliant scholar that I need to leave little areas of scholarship for other people to do. Otherwise I would just overwhelm the field with my enormous ego. I don't study much Israeli art, but when I see an Adi Ness photograph, some of them are kitschy and but some of them are very moving in the way that they make reference. I saw a fantasy, a sort of fantasia, and I forget the artist, on the theme of God silencing the angels at the Sea of Reeds when the angels want to sing praise, and God says in the Midrash, these people, these Egyptians, your enemies, they're humans. I made them. You can be happy that they're dead, but not me, right? You want the angels to sing? What did they ever do to the angels, right? So a sort of reflection, I guess, on rejoicing in the downfall of one's enemies. So I've seen stuff that I really like, and I have to say I'm in great sympathy with. I have great interest in fact, encouraging Israeli artists to dip into that wellspring of tradition. On the other hand, I understand if they don't want to, and that's also, in a way you can't escape, because either you're engaging with it or you're deliberately not engaging with it, and that's an engagement, right? So yes, I think there's a lot of good stuff going on, but it's not my area of study. It's not that I'm not interested.
I was actually also referring to both American and European
Oh, okay.
contemporary artists who are
Right.
now engaging more in that,
Right.
and would love to know if there's anyone you are looking at and find in.
I have to look more. I have to look
Okay.
more.
Okay. Last question that we got is where do you place Judaica in relationship to what you're doing? Does it appear sometimes, is it because let's say a Haggadah kind of lies in both categories? So how
So
do you
you
look at it?
meaning plastic arts that are ritual in nature, Judaica, silver, woodwork, etc., versus or in juxtaposition with visual art that is painted in some way or etched or two-dimensional. So
Or
I
the
would say
great crossover, because in synagogues you have paintings, but they are
correct, absolutely, absolutely. So my definite, not that I use the term Jewish art, but were I to use the term Jewish art, I would say that it has both Jewish content and some Jewish function. So the function can either be didactic. Here is a picture of Abraham and Isaac. Look upon it and feel the pain that Isaac feels, or feel the tornness that Abraham feels, right? Or here is a Kiddush cup that's intended for a bris that has Abraham and Isaac on it, because Isaac was the first person to have a bris, and look upon it and feel all those things, and also use the item in the ritual of the Brit Milah. So I think that they're related, and I think that they're also similar in that much Judaica, just like much of the book arts that we see, was commissioned by Jews from non-Jews. And that means in each case you have a conversation. It sounds like a joke, but the Jew walks into a manuscript shop and says, I want a Haggadah. And the Christian artist says, a Hawada. And the Jew says, it's like a book that you use for Pesach. And the Christian artist says, what's Pesach? He says, well, it's Pascha. It's like, oh, says the Christian artist, you mean Easter? Well, not quite, right? So they have this whole conversation. And I want a Kiddush cup. What's a Kiddush cup? Well, it's for ritual drinking. Oh, you mean like a chalice for the Eucharist? No, God forbid, not that, right? So there's a whole conversation that ensues. And some people lament the lack of named Jewish artists in history, or hallmarked Jewish silversmiths, or any of that stuff. I kind of like it because it means that there's somebody with ideas who's contacting somebody with skills, and they're having a conversation. This is the evidence of the conversation they had. So I would say that I do look at ritual Judaica, but usually only if it has some narrative element, if it's trying to tell a story along with what it does ritually. Okay?
Yes, thank you very, very much. As someone put it in one of the comments, I'll quote because it's so beautifully written. What a pleasure to hear two intelligent people having a sane conversation.
Oh, that is, can I just say one more thing?
Yes.
This book starts with the following words. Some believe that the heart of the universe beats at the site of the Holy of Holies on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Others locate the navel of the world in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in this self-same city. Although almost every culture throughout history had its candidate for the title of Axis Mundi, or heart chakra. For me, however, the cosmic epicenter is unquestionably the breakfast nook in our Poughkeepsie kitchen, whereas the sun streams in each morning over breakfast and perfectly roasted coffee, courtesy of Misha, my eldest son. Aggie and I opened our hearts and minds to each other before getting on with our day. I would not exchange those moments for any other. So that person is right. It is I don't know how intelligent we are, but it is a good conversation. And that's at the heart of any good relationship. I love all of you. I hope you buy the book, make me wealthy. Get somebody to review it. It's so nice to see you. Take care. Thank you, Sherelle, and thank you for your patience and your love and your persistence. Take care.